Rishi Sunak, who is set to become the UK's youngest Prime Minister in 200 years, will meet with King Charles before officially taking office.
Scheduled blackouts for Kyiv residents as Russia knocks lights out of a third of Ukraine's power stations.
With COP27 taking place very soon in Egypt, EU environment ministers gathered in Brussels to discuss their negotiating text.
No time for a political honeymoon period. Rishi Sunak is being asked to hit the ground running when he becomes the UK's youngest Prime Minister in 200 years and the first British Asian to hold the office. Liz Truss has to resign first, and then Sunak will be invited to form a government by King Charles during a royal audience in Buckingham Palace this morning. Sunak is no stranger to high office, having been Chancellor of the Exchequer during the pandemic. But he now has to deal with major economic problems and the challenge of restoring some political calm after what some have called a revolving door at number 10, with 3 Prime Ministers in 7 weeks.
We now need stability and unity, and I will make it my utmost priority to bring our party and our country together. Because that is the only way we will overcome the challenges we face and build a better, more prosperous future for our children and our grandchildren.
With reported warnings from Sunak to his fellow Conservatives that it's time to unite or die, referring to the recent divisive politics, analysts are now waiting to view his new cabinet with interest.
Scheduled power cuts have been introduced by Kyiv's energy operator as Russia repeatedly targets the nation's power network. More than 1 million Ukrainian households have lost electricity following the Russian strikes, according to the Ukrainian presidency, with at least a third of the country's power stations destroyed ahead of winter. Knowing when the power cuts are due means residents in the Ukrainian capital can plan ahead, and most are putting on a brave front. Sergei, an accountant here, says our house has scheduled blackouts for several days of 4 hours each. What to do? Well, we have to buy candles. We have to prepare somehow. Because recent events have made life a bit difficult. But what can we do? We have to survive. Yuri, a pensioner, says, I think it's necessary that shops should work. They should have electricity and people can sit in the dark. I'm not too worried. Ukraine's energy minister, German Galashenko, says Russian strikes on the power grid are coordinated with Russia's energy sector. He says from the point of view of the energy system, today's shelling is an action plan for the destruction of the Ukrainian energy system, which has been given to the military to carry out. The strikes on Ukraine's energy facilities came after the bridge linking annexed Crimea to mainland Russia was partially destroyed.
Under the rubble of Izium Hospital in eastern Ukraine, there are real examples of resilience. This medical facility was the only one to stay open when Russian troops overran the city in early March, not long after the invasion began. Surgeries moved to the basement to avoid airstrikes. Just a handful of doctors, nurses, paramedics and pathologists remained. Now they prepare for the winter after 6 deadly months under Russian occupation, drawing upon their harsh experiences. This surgeon says, we slept for 2 hours. It was cold. The temperature was maybe 3 or 4 degrees Celsius. We had to heat liquids with our bodies to use them. The surgeon's house was destroyed in July, so he lived in the basement too. The city's hospital rapidly filled with the sick and wounded who needed help. The handful of medical staff who stayed found ways to also help Russians. We had 2 portable gurneys with a stretcher that acted as an operating table. This patient says that everyone fled. The hospital was empty, but this group of people stayed in the basement and saved lives. Everyone in Izium knew about it and knocked on their door. whether or not it was closed. These people have a calling. Not everyone could do it. Izium returned to Ukrainian hands last month during a counter-offensive that dealt a blow to Moscow's war efforts. However, whilst things return to a relative norm, it'll take a lot longer for the scars to heal for the local residents and medical staff.
Russia has urged more civilians in occupied Kherson to flee to escape an anticipated Ukrainian counter-offensive. The residents are told to take documents, money, valuables and clothes due to the tense situation on the front. About 25,000 people have been relocated since Tuesday, the Interfax news agency reported. The Institute for the Study of War said that the urgent calls to flee indicated that the occupiers do not expect a rapid Russian or civilian return to the city and appeared to be trying to depopulate it to damage its long-term social and economic viability. Russian authorities also likely cut the internet access in Kherson city on the 22nd of October to limit local reporting of Russian evacuations to the east bank of the Dnipro River, while preparing to conduct delaying actions that will likely be only partially effective, says the Institute for the Study of War. The think tank also reiterated that Russian forces are likely preparing to destroy the dam at the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, flooding and widening the Dnipro River to delay any Ukrainian advances. They are likely attempting to moderate the resultant flooding, claiming they are lowering the volume of water from the reservoir behind the dam to minimize damage. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu likely sought to slow or suspend Western military aid to Ukraine and possibly weaken the NATO alliance in scaremongering calls with several NATO defense ministers on the 23rd of October, claiming that Ukraine is preparing to conduct a false flag attack using a dirty bomb, that is a conventional explosive laced with radioactive materials that is not a nuclear weapon, to accuse Russia of using the weapons of mass destruction. Russian forces conducted massive missile and drone attacks to degrade Ukrainian energy infrastructure, hitting the regions of Volyn, Rivne, Kharkiv, Khmelnytsky, Kirovograd, Cherkasy, Zaporizhia, Odessa and Mykolaiv. 8 months into the full-scale invasion, the Institute for the Study of War says ongoing Russian strikes on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure are extraordinarily unlikely to erode the Ukrainian will to fight, but will increasingly pose an economic and humanitarian challenge for Ukraine as temperatures drop.
With the international climate gathering, COP27, just around the corner, the EU is getting ready. Environment ministers met Monday in Luxembourg to agree on a text to take to the negotiations in Sharm el-Sheikh. With the use of coal on the rise since the war in Ukraine, ministers insisted the dirty fuel would not derail EU climate ambitions.
There needs to be some short-term flexibility. Some countries are increasing their consumption of coal and gas again. It is absolutely temporary and for energy security reasons.
The one conclusion we've drawn from the war is that we need to speed up our energy transition. So even if we use a bit more coal today, we will be going much faster in our energy transition. So on balance, our emissions will be reduced even faster than before.
At the COP26 in Glasgow, countries agreed to phase down their use of coal, even China and India. But since the war in Ukraine, Germany, Austria, Italy and the Netherlands all announced temporary measures to use it. Onlookers worry about this regression and the lack of net zero commitments from the corporate and financial world.
I think it's obviously a bad news because if we want to decrease the average temperature, we should definitely stop burning coal and oil. So the more we burn coal, the more it increases the temperature and the more the effort that we will need to do to reverse the curves when we will stop burning coal. We needed a war to see that we know in Europe we need in Europe a renewable energy planning, and I hope that now it's going to be done, and we need to accelerate that definitely.
COP27 will also look at setting up a fund to help countries severely impacted by climate change. The pressure is already on politicians, with thousands taking to the streets of Brussels last weekend. Maeve McMahon, Euronews.